Hi everyone, this is Ultimate Academy's team presenting ONYX Financial Track. We're currently on the vendors module, and in the previous lecture we finished the accounts payable with the reports and all, and in this lecture we will start talking about purchase management system. So first screen we have is purchase costing types. Let's bring that up and get started. The costing we're adding in this screen is related to the credit letters. First, we'll click on Add. The system automatically adds the costing method number. We'll add the costing method name, let's say FOB, which stands for Free on Board. And in this method, the vendor hands over the purchases on board, which means that the buyer, or us in this case, will handle all the relevant financial expenses, which are the cost of the goods, insurance, shipping, transportation, and all of the relevant expenses. In the letter of credit invoice account, we'll hit F9 and select that account. After you add the account, you'll specify the number of additional accounts, like the accounts that are linked to the cost of these letters of credit. If, for example, we said that the additional accounts are going to be a total of 3 accounts, then the system will allow data entry in 3 out of the 24 additional fields that you have down below. So in account number 1, we'll hit F9 and select the first additional account, and that is basically how it's going to work with the rest of them. Next screen we have is purchase request types. We'll move on to that one. So in this screen we specify the number of purchases that we might want to make, like for example a request to purchase assets or raw material. You'll click on Add and just type in the name of the type and the foreign name as well. And for your information, there is one type that is set up in the system by default, by the way, which is purchase request. Alright, so there it is. That one is by default. And we'll move on to the next screen, which is purchase order types. Same idea as the previous screen, but here it is not a request, it's an order. And note that you will need, or let's say it's preferable to unify the purchase request types and the purchase order types. That is just to help the people in the purchase department or the administration. Alright, so next screen is expenses encoding. And from this screen we can encode specific expenses that we can add automatically or easily select for our purchases. After you click on Add, you will enter the name and the foreign name for that expense, transportation for example. And in account number, we hit F9 and select the transportation expenses account. Automatically the name of the selected account is added. Then we will select the amount type, whether it's going to be a percentage or a specific amount. In case we selected amount, then obviously we will need to specify that amount. We have a variable here, enter account in purchase invoice. By activating this one, the system will add that expense account in the daily journal for the purchases, so consequently you will add that expense to the cost of the purchase itself. If that cost is taxed, then of course we will need to add the tax method in the lower table, and we will make that selection out of the tax calculation methods that we've already added before. Alright, so now we're actually done with the setup. We'll move on to the inputs, which is one screen basically, and that is going to be vendor item details. From this screen we'll specify what exactly are the items that the vendor supplies to the facility. The first field after clicking on Add is item data filling, either by vendor or per item. If we selected by vendor, then we can add more than one vendor for an item. And we specify these vendors from vendor code from and to. So let's explain that. If, for example, we'll say that vendor codes from 1 to 2 provide item number 1, it means that we have 2 vendors that provide item number 1 or item code number 1, whichever that item was. We'll specify the item code in the field, and in case we choose per item, then we're linking a single vendor to a bunch of items that they're providing. So obviously now we will specify one vendor, and then in item code from and to, you'll select the items that they provide. Alright, so in currency, you'll select the currency that you use to deal with this vendor, whether it's a local currency or foreign. That depends on your previous entry in the currencies. And in transaction type, in case we're linking new vendors to new items, then we will select filling data. Then we click on filling data, so we would get the details in the lower table. The second option we have is show data, and in this case we're viewing old data and selecting from existing data, basically the vendor and the items. So we've entered both before. In the detailed data below, if we select more than one vendor for an item, we can specify from the checkbox on the right which one of them is the main vendor. So that is basically the first way to use the screen. The second way is import from Excel. You import from an Excel sheet by clicking on this icon, and you follow the process that we've already covered together before. Now let's get into the transactions. The first screen is purchase request. This is where we place a request for a needed purchase. We can either use the screen by importing from Excel or through the functions of the screen itself, or the buttons and the features that we see in front of us. We'll click on add. It will automatically add the branch, request number, and date. And you should note that the branch is added automatically based on your login. It also shows us the available date for the order, which is the date of the transaction itself, but you can actually change this one or modify it according, of course, to the actual date. We can select a cost center from the drop-down menu, and in request side, we type down who is requesting this purchase, so either a person's name or whichever is in your case, because in department, we will select the actual department that is requesting this purchase. Then there is description and reference number, both are optional. We enter the code of the vendor that we're requesting this purchase from, hit F9 as usual, and select the right vendor from the list. So in case we retrieved this data or the data for this purchase request from any of these documents, we select the document from the drop-down menu install from, and we have the option to enter the reference number. So in number, we will hit F9 and select the number of that document if it's existing in the system. Then we click on auto request, and the system opens up a new screen. In this screen that the system will be opening up shortly, basically we place an automatic purchase request. So we re-enter all the data that we just entered and also specify the warehouse group. In both cases, whether it's an automatic purchase request or if we're using the screen itself, we specify in the table the item code. And when we select the item, the system brings up the measurement unit, warehouse available quantity, and the existing quantity in the entire facility. We enter the needed quantity for the order in the order quantity column. And that's it. If you like, for this screen, that's basically everything. Now we'll talk about quotation, which is the next screen. So in quotation, we record the pricings, or let's say the offers that the suppliers made. We can either import that from Excel or we use the screen itself. We'll click on add. The main data is automatically added. We will go ahead and select the vendor, cost center, method of taxes calculation, tender number, and tender date as well. In required days, we specify the number of days that the vendor will need to deliver the requested purchase. We select the item code from the table, the quantity, the price, and everything in the vendor's offer. And there is additional data, which is a tab with a bunch of empty fields for the user to basically have more space for any additional information that they need. So if this vendor adds any additional expenses, we can define that in other charges. And in charge number, we will hit F9 and select it from the charges that we entered in expenses encoding screen, which is the screen that we just went through. We will click on process, and the system automatically distributes that expense over the cost of the items. And obviously in tax, we will enter the tax calculation method. And that's basically everything. So we'll move on to the next screen, which is purchase order. So we can either import the purchase order from Excel or we can enter it manually. As we can see, we have 7 tabs. So we're already pretty familiar with import from Excel, tax, and additional fields, other charges as well, because we just covered that. Now let's talk about master details. Main data is automatically filled in. And if we're placing this purchase order from a purchase request or a quotation or any of these choices, then we will select the one that we want to use and type down the number of that document in request number. After we select the vendor, currency, and cost center as usual, we define the invoice type from the existing types that we have here. Now, in item costing, we select the right method that we want to use here, whether it's going to be the last income and price, weighted average cost, or the vendor price. You also need to select the method of tax calculation based on your previous entry. And if we want to suspend this order or basically stop it, we'll check the inactive box and enter the reason, obviously. In case we want to add the quantity that will be shipped before it is actually out for the shipping, we can activate the variable enter shipping quantity before incoming. As for financial logged, so this variable allows the financial administration to suspend this entire transaction until the financial administration themselves remove that log. Before entering the items in the table, the items we're ordering, we can review the status of these items at the warehouses by clicking on Advanced Options. Alright, so here we can actually search for the items and review the existing quantity and in which warehouses and so on. So we're basically viewing the details of these items. And if we want to use a calculator, we can click on this icon and it will bring up your computer's calculator. In case we have items that have no existing pricing, we can add pricing for it, and we can also review the price of all the items by clicking on item pricing, which will bring up the item pricing screen from the inventory module, and we already talked about that one before. Alright, so when we click on this icon, that means that we need to check the barcode before printing and the printing method for these item barcodes. There we go. So it brings up the items barcode printing screen from the inventory module as well. And now we can specify the items in the table below. We will hit F9 and select the items. We're already familiar with how to fill in the data in that table. You will basically just click on the field, hit F9, and select the right choice. If not that, you will manually enter the data. Right, so in follow-up, we can track the order. You'll select the order number and the system will show you whether it is closed or not yet. So in insurance, we enter the insurance policy, insurance company, insurance terms, the number of the vendor's invoice, receive date, and all of the information that is related to the insurance of the purchase. So side note on this tab, it is mostly used by shipping companies. Any facility or any activity can actually use this screen, but what we're saying is that it is mostly used by shipping companies because that kind of information is like really important in their field or important to their work. So that is basically it. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe, and we will see you again in the next lecture.